I think the exact moment where this production lost me was when they were singing I Still Believe in the supermarket. And she's singing, I will hold you all night, I will make it all right. And I'm like, that's fine, you can do that. But you're in the fruit aisle right now and you need to go home. Oh my god, hey, welcome back to my theatre-themed YouTube channel. My name is Mickey Joe and I am obsessed with all things theatre. I am an international theatre critic here on YouTube, and I recently travelled to the north of the UK to go to visit the Sheffield Crucible for their production of MISS SAIGON. I've left my programme over there. Bear with me one moment. Excuse me. I nearly called myself a professional theatre critic, but honestly, do I deserve that today? Here we go. This is the lovely programme from the Sheffield Crucible production of MISS SAIGON. So this is a very interesting new version of the show. It's the regional premiere of the show in the UK. The show has toured to regional venues before, but this is the first time that it's being produced in a theatre outside of London. And it's very much not a replica of the original production. This has made some substantial changes to the show, such as casting Joanna Ampeel, who is known for having formerly played the role of Kim. She is playing the engineer. She is playing a newly female take on the character for this version, and that is not where the changes end. So in today's video, I'm going to be telling you all about this production. What did they try and change? What was their goal in editing some of the material? And did I think those changes paid off? What did I think of the performances? What do I think of the material? I'm going to answer all of these in today's review. If you enjoy this one, make sure to subscribe to my theatre-themed YouTube channel for plenty more reviews and other stagey content coming very soon. For now, check out this sneak peek of the show's opening night curtain call and stay tuned for my full review of MISS SAIGON. So I'm a big MISS SAIGON fan. I saw the last London revival 4 or 5 times at the Prince Edward Theatre. It's a beautiful show. If you don't know, it features a score by Bublil and Schoenberg, who were the composing team behind Les Miserables. It's similarly epic, it's similarly romantic. It relocates the story of the opera Madame Butterfly to the final days of the Vietnam War and the years that follow, and it depicts a soldier named Chris who falls in love with a local Vietnamese girl named Kim. Now, some additional context I want to give you here is that this show has come under a decent amount of criticism. Back in its original run, Jonathan Pryce, who originally starred as the engineer, was criticised for being cast in this role as a white actor playing a mixed-race Asian character, and for using facial prosthesis in order to try and make himself look more Asian. Completely gross by today's standard. And if we're being completely honest, it was gross at the time and it never should have happened. Nowadays, the casting has become a lot more authentic, with the show giving opportunities to a great many talented Asian performers. Even Oblizada's career was launched with this show when she starred in the West End revival a few years ago, before she went on to play Eurydice in the original cast of Hadestown. Similarly, John Briones, who starred as the engineer in that production. There have been a great many very talented Asian performers who have come through MISS SAIGON, not to mention its original Kim, Lea Salonga. The enduring criticism comes with their positioning within the show. The Asian performers in the show in the opening scenes are playing prostitutes at a bar frequented by American GIs. And the material has been criticised for romanticising this white saviour narrative from the perspective of an invading soldier, and for positioning these female Asian performers to basically be playing sex objects who don't have a tremendous amount of their own agency within the show. So this revival, I think, has sought to revise a lot of those ideas. And when you put on any new production of a show, you have the opportunity to do that. They've made little changes here and there, but also with the way that you stage things, with the way that you direct different characters, with the way that you cast different roles. You can bring different things out of the text and you can play with power dynamics and things like that. And we're going to explore in this review a lot of the things that they've done with this show in order to try and turn it on its head a little bit. So let me tell you why this production of MISS SAIGON is so different to any that you've ever seen before. So with this show, They're really trying to escape the white savior narrative and the lack of agency within the Asian women portrayed in the show, and they've gotten around this a few different ways. First of all, Chris and Ellen are no longer white. They are both played by black actors, which really only just changes the technicality of everything, but it's a glass ceiling that ought to have existed for no reason whatsoever, and I'm glad that we finally had this breakthrough in casting and allowing black performers to play these roles. The way that they change the focus on the way that Asian women are depicted in the show is done via a series of lyric changes and sort of slight plot changes and different pieces of staging. Most of it all happens within the first few minutes of the show in the song The Heat Is On in Saigon. This is the number where the GIs are coming into the bar, Dreamland, in Vietnam, and that's always been the most egregious part of the show in terms of its controversy, right? So there's a lot of things that happen just to make this scene different. First of all, we have different lyrics here. The GIs used to sing kind of demeaning things about the women. They don't anymore. Chris himself used to sing, "I used to love getting high, waking up with some whore. I don't know why I went dead, it's not fun anymore." He now sings waking up with some girl rather than waking up with some whore. It doesn't rhyme with it's not fun anymore, but for some reason they don't want him to say the word whore. Now this is a change I don't really think achieves what they want it to, because Chris here is being flippant and derogatory, and I don't think trying to soften the attitudes of the Marines in this section is going to do anything to kind of prove any point, because this was a historical chapter that happened, and this was a situation that these women were placed in, and this was something that they were subjected to. I don't think making the GIs speak more nicely about them as they come into the bar to pay to sleep with them is really helping do anything other than just trying to put a sort of a filter over this actual chapter of history. Critically, there is a moment in this scene where Gigi and John start to have an argument because John wins Gigi in the raffle. They clearly have some kind of a pre-existing relationship that we don't really find out about, and Gigi says, "When are you going to take me to America?" Previously, when Gigi makes a scene, the engineer would slap Gigi and say, "Don't F with me." Now in this version, when John moves to retaliate towards Gigi, Joanna Ampeel gets in the way, pushes him away and says, "Don't F with her," protecting Gigi. Now, I don't know if this necessarily resonates with the engineer's character, but more on that later. In any case, we get the sense that this is an engineer who is a little bit more protective of the girls. We then have the song Movie in My Mind. This is sung first by Gigi and then by Kim. Usually in this song there's a bit of staging where there's a little bit of a tussle, and Chris goes out of his way to protect Kim before they've really had the chance to meet. He's seen her in passing earlier in the song, and he sang "Sweet Jesus, John, who is she?" He's got the whole love at first sight thing, but it's his actions here that indicate to Kim that he might be a safer choice for her. And that is why at the end of the song we get this sort of a chorus echo of the other girls singing, "And in a strong GI's embrace, flee this life, flee this place." So we don't really have that moment where Kim connects to Chris, and we don't really know why she chooses him. But in this version, she is given a lot more agency in choosing him, and she's very clearly making a choice. She almost feels a little bit too knowing here is the problem. They've really tried to put Kim in charge of what happens to her in this show and give her this sense of agency. And then we have the problem that evolves from that, where their love never really feels earned. Because we don't have those perhaps cliched romantic beats in the lead up to it, it never really feels like an organic and a natural romance between the two, and once you don't believe this central love, just about everything else in the show falls down. So that probably was my biggest problem with the show, but we'll get to that. At the end of Movie in My Mind, we have Joanna Ampeel as the engineer who is sat wistfully on the stairs halfway up. She sings along the final few lines with Kim just to really hammer home that she's in the same position as all of the girls. However, the engineer has a reprise of Movie in My Mind that comes slightly later in the show, so I don't know that we needed that necessarily. But for now, I would like to tell you about the star rating I have decided to give it. So it's no secret really by this point that this production didn't really work for me. I like a big swing, I respect a big swing, and I like to see musicals revived. It's probably my favourite thing to talk about here is a musical revival that's done something really different with the show. And with this one, I so understand the motivations behind it. I get what they're trying to do differently. However, this material is still what it is. You cannot change the fact that Kim's entire trajectory in the show is because she does have this enormous, enduring love for the American GI, Chris, that she comes together with at the beginning. So I don't think it's possible to reframe it without this kind of saviour narrative, because that's what she pins everything on. There's no way to completely shift it and position him as the antagonist in this story or anything like that, because the material just is what it is. Now, the material is fantastic. I think Miss Saigon is an incredible show with a beautiful score. It's really, really great, and I think it's the strength of that material that keeps this being a really enjoyable production. People leapt to their feet afterwards. That's no secret. I'm not going to say that didn't happen, but it's because of the strength of the material. This got great reviews from a lot of the print critics, I think, on the strength of the material. The material endures through all of these changes to it. However, this is not the best version of this material. This is not the best representation of this material, and there's a lot of ways in which it's let down by this staging, unfortunately. I'm going to talk a lot more about specifics, but my big picture problems. It's this love between Kim and Chris. We never really believe it. Chris, in elevating Kim, gets sidelined a lot as a character. There's this very weird version of the ending where he isn't even lit, and a lot of the choices that they make kind of emotionally alienate us from the impact that that ending ought to have. Again, I will get to that when I'm talking about specificities. But regrettably, I never for a second believed the love they had for each other. I don't think I warmed entirely to Jessica as Kim. I don't think I warmed entirely to Christian as Chris. And the big problem is just the lack of emotional connection throughout the show. And I think a show can only be so emotionally connecting when it has a set like this that's very grey, mostly bare stage with a step unit that gets moved around. And not only does it lack any kind of atmosphere or emotion, but it makes it very, very difficult to detect place. It's incredibly difficult to infer location from this production. And it's crucial that we are able to. In those first few scenes, we are opening in this dreamland bar, and then Chris goes away with Kim to Kim's room, or he takes her back to where he is staying. We're not entirely sure. Are Gigi and John leaving together to go back to John's place? Do they have some kind of an enduring relationship? Later on in the show, it gets teased that they might have had a more substantial relationship that kind of mirrors Kim's and Chris's. We see that more in this version of the show than we've ever seen before. But because we can't detect place, because we're just looking at this grey, bare stage with people just walking around and going up to different windows, and we have no idea where anyone is, then we can't really take the meaning from that. Later, there is a jump forwards in time, and when we meet Kim, there are so many lyrics describing the fact that she is living on the streets and living in poverty, but the way she is costumed and the way she seems to be coming down these stairs, is she living in the same apartment that Chris left her in? Is she living in a pretty nice area? She looks to be like taking the bins out. Basically, there's very little desperation that we can take from her surroundings in that moment, and it jars completely with what we're hearing in the lyrics. I have a bunch more very specific notes that I'm just going to run through now to give you a sense of the many issues that I had with this show. So when we do have the time jump forwards, it says 3 years later, but immediately what we then see on stage is Ethan Lifong, who is playing Toy, and he appears as he would have done 3 years previously. It shows us 3 years later at the start of the song The Morning of the Dragon, and then we see him from clearly before that time jump. I don't know why they didn't just show the 3 years later at the appropriate moment in the song when they're actually going to jump forwards in time. When we do see him again, it's because Toy has become the commissar and he has risen to this powerful position, and before we saw him like with dirt on his face in rags, and now he's dressed in a military uniform, and rather than give us any kind of an impact with that, he just sidles on out at a random point in the music and turns around, and there's no gravitas to his entrance whatsoever. And there's the perfect point in the music to give him gravitas, but they don't capitalize on this. So Toy, now the commissar, has had the engineer summoned to him, and right before he is about to sing to the engineer, we have this bit in the music that goes da 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 da. He should be upstage facing away from us and then turn around so we can see that it's Toy on those parts of the music. It would be a gasp-inducing moment. Instead, he just sort of wanders on, dimly lit, and then gradually we're like, oh, he's wearing this Toy, but he's dressed in a soldier's uniform now. No impact. Zero impact. Another moment that lacked impact is the beginning of the song This Is the Hour. This is this huge choral entrance that should hit you right in the gut, and because of the scene leading up to that, it doesn't. So this is going to be a substantial spoiler for anyone who hasn't seen the show. I'm going to talk about a big spoiler thing that happens. You have been warned, skip ahead if you don't want to know about this. So with the engineer's help, Toy goes to find Kim and offer her marriage once again, having offered this to her a few years previously, but she was with Chris, so she declined. Now Chris has gone back to America, Kim's living in poverty, and he's like, now you're definitely going to want to marry me. Look at my shiny military uniform. I do like what they've done with the engineer here, with her kind of lingering on the stairs and kind of berating Kim for not getting herself out of this situation. It feels a lot more honest in that moment to have the dialogue between the two of them because they're both women in similar positions of lacking power within society. Kim insists that she can't marry Toy. Eventually she reveals Tam, the young child that she has had. Now in the original version of the show, Tam remains on stage when Toy sings that the child cannot live if they are going to be together, and then tries to kill the child, and Kim then screams, "You will not touch him, don't touch my boy." Huge emotional moment, great part of the score. In this version of the show, I don't know if they just didn't want to traumatize the child, but the child has gone off stage. So Ethan as Toy is kind of pointing a gun off into the wing of where the child ran off. We clearly don't get as much impact from this. Unfortunately, it means that whole scene just doesn't feel as immediate. There's no tension, there's no danger there quite as much. Ultimately, Kim brandishes a gun that she holds towards Toy, and he's like, "You don't know how to kill," and then, surprise, surprise, she does, and she shoots him. All of which is a great opportunity to use the revolve that they're standing on. This revolve is underused in the show, and specifically at this moment when she sings the lyrics, "I feel the earth move where I stand, I feel the turning of the wheel." I'm like, how are you not using the revolve at this point? They're basically stood on it at opposite points along the diameter of this circle. And I think what would be fantastic is if you had this whole revolve spinning while they are just singing at each other, staying mostly in the same spots, and then it stopped when it lines up with the wing, when he's pointing the gun down there, she is behind him on the diagonal and she shoots him. That's when the revolve should stop, and then we get "This is the hour." As it stands, we didn't get that in the staging, and that's why I think it lacked impact. The song is still great, and you'll still get a certain... Is there an ice cream van outside? What is happening right now? Now, having said that that was a weird moment where Tam wasn't on stage, afterwards, when Kim is singing "I'll Give My Life For You," it's weird that Tam is on stage in the way that he is, because rather than her kneeling and cradling Tam at her feet, as it's traditionally staged, she's just kind of awkwardly standing and holding his hand, and they remain stood side by side with her holding his hand, which is fine in the beginning when she's singing this kind of a soft lullaby, but it soon segues into her remembering and her kind of traumatically remembering her time with Chris. And she's singing, "Was he a ghost? Was he a lie that made my body laugh and cry?" And she's having this full breakdown while holding the child's hand, who's just looking at her like, is she okay? These are simple directing choices. They had great creatives on this team, and I'm surprised that they haven't been able to see these little issues of like, should this person be kneeling? Should they be sitting? Should they be standing in this number? It feels oddly conspicuous and a bit uncomfortable to have her standing for the duration of that song. So I mentioned that some of the locations for where these numbers were staged had been changed. One of the weirder ones for these is the song "I Still Believe." We have Kim in Ho Chi Minh City singing "I Still Believe that Chris will come back for me, that we'll be together," and then we cut to Chris and his new wife Ellen in Detroit. Usually this is staged with the two of them in bed, and he then starts having a night terror halfway through the song, and she tries to shake him out of it and says, "It's all over, my dear, you have nothing to fear, Chris was haunting you." But on this one, they've relocated this to a supermarket. Someone drops a can or something, and this then triggers him because it sounds like gunfire or whatever, and he spins around, he goes, "Kim, Kim." Now he's very awake doing this, which means he's consciously, albeit sort of like traumatized and triggered, he's consciously awake shouting Kim's name, which feels again just a bit conspicuous. And also when he's then subsequently lying on the ground and she's holding him and she's singing, "I will hold you all night, I will make it all right," and I'm like, that's fine, you can do that, but you're in the fruit aisle right now and you need to go home. It's just odd. I think I like the idea of staging it out and about and showing the kind of lingering PTSD and how that can manifest in everyday life. I like the idea of the can being the thing that triggers that, but the lyrics don't lend themselves to any kind of a setting outside of the two of them being in bed together. Not to mention that we lose a little bit of the parallel between Kim's world and theirs. There's a lot of weirdness in the way that this production deals with ghosts. This, again, because it talks about death, is going to be a series of substantial spoilers for the show. So we have this thing where rather than having them lie on the stage and being corpses, they almost immediately walk out of the spaces where they died and they become ghosts instantly. And we see the characters mourning the spaces where they just were on the floor. Now, this allows for us seeing the perspective of them as ghosts reacting to the moments of their death, but it does completely inhibit the emotional impact of the characters crying over their corpses. The first time this happens is when Kim shoots Toy in the first act. We have him walking around sort of judging her while she is crying at an empty bit of floor. But then the worst one, the really egregious moment, comes at the end of the show when, again, huge spoiler alert, Kim shoots herself so that Chris and Ellen are forced to take Tam with them back to the US and give Tam the life that Kim has dreamed of for her child. But she steps out of this spot, so we see Chris lying on the floor, crying over nothing, not holding the body of Kim because she's just walking around in a circle, while an ensemble member who we have come to understand by this point in the show represents Tam, who is older now, who we saw at the beginning of the show watching a TV, mirroring what young Tam is doing in this scene, just watches her walking around looking a little bit emotionally vacant. At this point, I'm not crying, I'm not devastated, and again, we have a more empowered Kim. She's not lying on the floor being cradled as a corpse, as a casualty of all of this. She's walking around and she has agency, but she has ghost agency because she still just shot herself and she's still dead. We're just not as sad about it because it doesn't look as sad. And like, sensibly, we still understand that the same thing has happened. It's still the same sad situation that's always been depicted. It just doesn't look that way, so we don't feel it instinctively. This production generally has a real reluctance to just let people sob on the floor, and so much of a show like Les Mis or Miss Saigon is people sobbing on the floor. As that end scene then unfolds, Chris is not even lit. Instead, we just focus on the engineer and Ellen and Tam all sort of coming together in front of the television, and Tam, older Tam, reacting to Kim, but Chris is in the background, not lit, completely an afterthought. Let me tell you about some of the parts of the show that I did enjoy. There's still a lot of good stuff in here. So, my absolute favourite number of the entire thing was Bouidoy. The way that this was staged, I wasn't sure to begin with because we had John at a meeting of like Vietnam veterans. It was clearly like a support group. And he starts singing the first few lines of Bouidoy in this setting. And when I heard those lyrics in this new setting, I thought, wow, this really resonates in this kind of environment. He's singing, like all survivors, I thought, when I'm home I won't give a damn, but now I know I'm caught, I'll never leave Vietnam. And I thought that's great, but we are about to lose something when we don't have him sort of like appealing to the UN about the Bouidoy, which are the children of the Marines and the local women. However, the scale of this number and the pace with which it moved, we transformed from that setting to him then on the streets handing out flyers. We then get a tearaway jacket reveal, and he's then speaking to the UN by the end of the song, by the time we get to the help me try. Now, it's not the most soaring, riff-tastic gospel vocal of this song that you've ever heard, but in place of that, in lieu of that, we get a lot more emotional connection to the lyrics, which maybe hasn't gone hand in hand with all of the riffs and high notes that we've heard in previous versions. It feels more like a harkening back to the original, where we really get the meaning of this lyric. This song is kind of the emotional heart of the entire second act and the way that the plot is going to unfold. And I think just the scale of this number and the pace of this number, that we could go from setting to setting to setting within just 3 minutes, it just took my breath away. And I wish the entire show had been directed with that much pace and with that much vision, because there are so many other numbers that are just static in one spot, and that one place isn't that interesting. For Bouidoy to be able to transport itself so rapidly, I thought it was great. The only thing that lost me in Bouidoy was right at the end, he sees this vision of Gigi, and again, we never earned this in the beginning. There was nothing to suggest that that relationship meant enough to him for her to be lingering in his mind the way that she is. If that was just set up with even a little bit more silent staging at the beginning, we would have a reason to believe in it. I also have to mention what was probably a lot of the audience's favourite number in the show, which is The American Dream. This is always a really crowd-pleasing, show-stopping number because it comes in and amongst all of this drama, this love triangle between Kim and Chris and Ellen, and all of this angst and woe, and it's the engineer thinking about the life that they are about to experience in America. We get this whole elaborate dream sequence. Joanna Ampeel delivered this wonderfully. We got another outfit reveal where she turns into Marilyn Monroe with the blonde wig and the pink dress and the gloves, doing the gentlemen prefer blondes kind of a shtick. I did think, would it not make more sense for her to be the Statue of Liberty and kind of like this idea that represents immigration, but also Marilyn Monroe, I guess, is a huge icon in terms of like owning your own sex appeal for profit. And it's just a fun number. It's a great number. The attitude that she poured into it, she made it fantastic. I enjoy the red jacket, the engineer red jacket Easter egg that happens at the beginning of the show when the engineer is going through outfits that she might wear and they offer the jacket and she's like, no, I like that. It's a fun nod to the original production. Morning of the Dragon, choreography terrific. The choreography was by Jade Hackett and it felt militaristic and urgent. I liked the way that the flashback was staged when in the second act we travel backwards in time to find out why Kim never made it out of Vietnam. The way they staged this was very clever. We don't have a helicopter, if anyone has been wondering about this, nor do we have a projection of a helicopter really. Instead, it's implied that the helicopter is above, and we have this very cool thing where Chris and John are both kind of leaning, kind of having descended out of the ceiling of the Sheffield Crucible, and we have this ladder that's come down, and we have him literally hanging out of what's implied to be a helicopter up above, reaching out to Kim, who's at the top of the step unit, and he just can't reach her, but comes painfully close to being able to, and that's how narrowly she missed out on being able to go to America with him, which is heartbreaking. I liked the way The Last Night of the World was staged. We had this spotlight on Kim and Chris from above that sort of tightened to a smaller circle. We had this kind of like starry effect. The projection design, the projection mapping was really terrific in this show. It couldn't help us to really infer location at many points. They showed us like different like floor plans and different like street maps as seen from bird's eye views. I think that's what they were going for on the back wall. But I liked this Last Night of the World moment. It got a little bit too big. There was a starburst at one point and it was a little bit too La La Land. It kind of looked like they were being announced as the next couple on Strictly Come Dancing. I think it was just a level of like musical theatre that was a little bit insincere. Something else I really liked was the way that the ending of the first act was staged, because we don't often see Kim and Tam and the engineer on the boat sailing away towards the promise of a new life, but we saw that in this one. It was very much Life of Pi inspired, with the way that it looked, with the way that it was staged. Life of Pi having also started life at the Sheffield Crucible, but that's fine because it gave us a new thing to see in Miss Saigon, and that's what this revival ought to have been able to do, is give us a lot more perspectives on the show. So that moment I liked. So Jessica Lee is playing Kim. I particularly really enjoy everything in her higher head voice register. It's beautiful, it's angelic, it's dreamlike. There are moments of the belting that get to be just a little bit shouty. I would like just a little bit more vocal control in some of those. And again, I think the way that she's staged in various different numbers prevents us from connecting to her emotionally as much as we could. I think they're trying to depict her as a stronger, more willful, more independent Kim, but the material has been written to show her in complete vulnerability throughout, kneeling on the floor and wishing that Chris, her love, was with her. Christian Maynard plays Chris, and he might be one of the most secure Chris vocals I've ever heard. I've heard a lot of great Why God Whys in my time, but when that same melody is reprised in the second act, there's a particular moment where he sings, "The story of my life began again with you," and I never have heard that sung as well as Christian Maynard sang it. I thought it was a really secure vocal. It's a very different kind of a vocal tone to a lot of the Chris's that I've heard before. It was soulful, it was rousing, but I really enjoyed his vocal delivery. Something that got on my nerves a little bit in Why God Why, again, I don't know if this is how he was staged between the director and the choreographer, but he kept physically hitting the beats of the song. Now, the way that the Sheffield Crucible is shaped is it's a thrust stage with audience on three sides, and he was playing this like, I'm going to go over here for this line, then over here for this line, and then down the front for the next one. And he's singing Stamp. When I went home before, no one talked of the war, what they knew from TV didn't have a thing to do with me. Walk over to the other side of the stage and then Stamp. I went back and re-upped, and he's just like hitting his marks on the beats of each line, and it starts to feel a little bit disingenuous when you do something like that. It's very at home in an old classic movie musical, but it makes it seem like he's too aware of the orchestra to be singing as a character who he shouldn't be singing. He's just a character feeling his feelings, but everything is sung through because it's that kind of a musical. But we shouldn't get the sense that he can hear the band, if you get what I'm saying. Ayn Rand Ferrer plays Gigi in this, and she has understudied, I believe, the role of Kim before. Ayn Rand was in Allegiance earlier this year at the Charing Cross Theatre. I thought she was brilliant in that, and she has a voice that sounds so much like Lea Salonga that it's kind of difficult not to hear her sounding like a Kim. She has such a youthfulness and a sweetness to her voice. It's such a Kim vocal that she never really sounds like Gigi. She's also very diminutive in stature. She doesn't really look like a Gigi, and she doesn't overplay like the bitchiness to compensate for any of that. She looks very sweet, she sounds very sweet. She really needs to hammer the assertiveness of her character for us to believe that she's any way other than the way that she looks and sounds. Joanna Ampil is tremendous as the engineer. She commands an awful lot of power, but the engineer's character comes down to two different things. You have the showmanship and the charm, or the showwomanship, I should say. We need a gender-neutral word for showmanship. Showpersonship. I don't know. But the other side of that is this desperation and this drive and this need to get to America. And we have to see that because it's so long before we really get the engineer's backstory. Not until the first few verses of The American Dream do we come to find out why the engineer cares so much about the American dream, about capitalism and this US lifestyle. And the problem is, Joanna Ampil is playing desperation and drive and charm in abundance. But when we have the engineer being protective of the girls and not wanting to risk everything and do everything and not putting this American dream as the most important thing, we start to lose a little bit of the ambition and the desperation. I don't get desperation from her character until much later in the second act. And then we see this ruthlessness. We see her holding on to Tam and not giving Tam back to Kim until Kim promises that the engineer will also get to go to America. This really doesn't resonate with how we've seen the engineer at the beginning of the show being protective of Gigi and the rest of them. I think it would be almost more powerful if we had a female engineer who, even though she can relate to the girls, is still ruthless with them. Because at the end of the day, she cares first and foremost about herself. Vocally, the other implication of changing a character's gender is that the keys all end up in a slightly weird place, and Joanna Ampil is jumping around different octaves to try and make this work, but for large portions of the score she's forced to almost sing it because it just doesn't sit in a comfortable place in a higher vocal register. Ethan Lifong I really enjoyed as Toy. I'd seen him play this role in the original production, and I think his is the character that has changed the least. He is older than Jessica Lee, who is playing Kim, and I thought they were going to do something interesting with that, where she was really reluctant to marry him because they were promised to each other, even though for a handful of reasons they were never going to be in love. And I think as an older man, potentially that could add another dimension to it, but they didn't seem to want to play on that because they kept in the line about them being promised at 13. Now, I don't know if that was Kim's 13 or Toy's 13, but you are not convincing me that they were 13 at the same time. If they were promised at 13, someone was lying. Interestingly, Kim's age goes out the window in this production. She used to sing "I'm 17 and I'm new here today." They cut that. I'm pretty sure she now sings "I'm just a girl and I'm new here today," something like that. "I'm just a girl, not yet a woman." But she doesn't say that she's 17. I think, again, because they don't want it to look like Chris, the older GI, is going off with this prostitute who's 17, even though, per the material, that's what happened. And the other performer that I want to mention is Shanae Holmes as Ellen. By the second act, the way that she's playing it, sort of hysterical and just desperate and not knowing what to do, really works for me. I think she came in a little strong with it in the earlier parts of the show when we first meet her character and she's singing "I Still Believe." She is just woefully worried for Chris, and if she held it together just a little bit more in that so that she could completely come undone in the second act, it would be more rewarding rather than her just existing on this one desperate emotional level for the entirety of the show. Some of her vocal delivery might be a little bit indulgent, but she sounds sensational singing Maybe, so you get over it. I do still think Maybe is not as good a song as Now That I've Seen Her, or even the original version of Now That I've Seen Her that was called It's Her or Me. I preferred that version of the song that depicted Ellen as this real and complicated person who was reacting in a very honest and perhaps difficult way to finding out about Kim and how meeting her and seeing her had evolved her understanding of the situation, but she was still going to fight for her love. And maybe it's just a song where she really laments the whole thing and feels sorry for herself, and if she's like, well, Chris, if you want to go to her, then you can, that's fine, maybe you hate me. And in this version of the show, it's now sung by a black woman, but previously it just feels like a way of adding in a ballad full of white tears into this story. It's another area of the show where I feel like we're losing Kim's perspective. Why, when Kim has just found out that Chris, who she has clung to for years and prayed for, she has just found out that he has given up on her and he has got married in the short few years since they lost each other. Immediately after that happens, we hear from Ellen and not Kim. Why is that? That feels very much swayed to the white perspective. In this version, not the white perspective, but it feels swayed to the Western perspective. If you look at the show structurally and dramaturgically, Kim really ought to be the one who is singing sorrowfully in that situation, but instead, we get Ellen. Shanae does give one of the best performances of the show in the scene that follows this, when she is then sort of sparring with Chris and saying, "You said you slept with her, that's all you were. Only one thing you left out is that you loved her." Every single choice she makes in that scene was perfect for me. I was so with her, I was so on board for her characterization in that moment. Terrific. Interestingly, they cut the line when Kim first enters in and Ellen thinks that she might be the maid in the hotel before she realizes who she is. This is a little bit of a sort of a throwaway microaggression that's deliberately shown to depict a Western perspective, a slightly racist Western perspective in the original version. It's meant to show Ellen in a slightly unflattering light, but they'd cut that. Again, I don't know if that actually uplifts the Asian characters in this show as much as it just tries to make the Western characters look better by being less racist. I don't know if that's honest or necessarily the best idea. I think they've just kind of tried to cut all the microaggressions in the show, but not really considered what that does to the positioning of each character. So I have no idea how long this video is going to edit down to be. Right now I've been talking for an hour about all of this. I have a lot of thoughts about the individual choices made in this show and why they don't really serve the overall idea. But just to recap, I really do think we lost the romantic impact of it all, a lot of the emotional impact of the show. The score is still terrific. The performances themselves are still really strong, but all of those elements could be brought together a lot more skillfully and a lot more meaningfully, and some of the choices that have been deliberately made cut it off at the knees. I would encourage anyone who loves Miss Saigon and wants to see this production, anyone with curiosity, to still go and see it if you like these performers, and there are some very talented performers in this cast. Go and see it, go and support them. Sheffield Crucible is a terrific venue, and I wish I could tell you that I loved everything they did with this show, but unfortunately a lot of the choices simply didn't pay off for me. But again, that is only my perspective. A lot of other people feel differently. Certainly a lot of the print reviews were kinder to the show than I have been. If you have seen the show at the Sheffield Crucible, let us know what you thought in the comments section down below, especially if you disagreed with my thoughts. Also, if you've ever seen Miss Saigon before, let us know when you saw it, where you saw it, and who was starring in that version of the show. Thank you so much for watching today's video. I hope you've enjoyed. If you did, make sure to subscribe to my theatre-themed YouTube channel for plenty more reviews and lots of other stagey content coming very soon. I hope that everyone is staying safe and that you have a stagey day.
For 10 more seconds, I'm Mickey Joe Theatre. Oh my god, hey, thanks for watching, have a stagey day. Subscribe!